This is my interpretation of Pete Turner's tree doodle, if you can call it a tree doodle, because as you can see this is very much a work of art. For those who aren't familiar with Pete, who might have come to the site as a curious bystander rather than a participant in the world of tree reading, Pete is one of the foremost mind readers and psychological entertainers, not only in the UK but in the world, and is a creative consultant to a number of entertainers who have international shows and television appearances. So I would encourage you to find out a bit more about him if you don't know about Pete. I've had the pleasure of conversing with Pete on Skype on a number of occasions, and although I am going to be conducting this reading as if I've not met him and as if I don't know very much about him, in the interests of disclosure I ought to say, there are certain elements of Pete's life and background that I know about from our conversations, but the reading I'm giving would have been the same whether I'd seen this blind or whether I knew him. So there's a great deal to say, and I thought I'd use this opportunity to talk a bit more about how I approach a reading as well, because this is such a rich opportunity here. The first thing to say is that my approach to tree reading is very similar to the Gesalt or German school of graphology rather than the atomistic French school of graphology. And if you're not familiar with the difference between those two, the French system tends to break down handwriting into its composite parts in order to analyse it. The German system tends to look at the overview, the patterns that emerge. And the way that I do that when I'm conducting a reading is this. I look at three things: the use of space, the movement that is suggested by the drawing, and the form, the individual components and lines themselves. And it's a combination of those things that allow me to kind of get my feet before I go into the reading proper. The use of space, it tells us about a person's perception of the world and the barriers that they might hold between themselves and others. And if you look at Pete's drawing here, well, first of all, it takes up all of the canvas, but it's beautifully balanced. So not only can we tell that he has aesthetic sensibilities and is an extremely creative individual, but he's very generous and outgoing. He gives and gives, and in fact I would say to his own detriment. At times I suspect that energetically, having given for months at a time, he'll suddenly collapse and need to retreat and recharge his batteries before he feels energized enough to repeat that process. The other thing I'd like to say about the use of space is that there's a lot of negotiation going on here in the space between the ground down here and this canopy. And you'll notice, if you look carefully, that there is an arched heart here that travels and follows the shape of the tree. Equally, if you look here, I perceive a head shape, and so as well as a heart, it could be a guardian angel that is encompassing the tree in its wings. Both of these things would suggest to me a big-hearted person, someone who has an awful lot to give and to share with the world, and someone who has a deep sense of spirituality, someone who actually, as their journey through life continues, is recognising that the world's a big place and that there are some mysterious and unusual things that can take place within it. Pete's 25, but he's had a lot of life experience along the way, and my inclination is that he is opening out spiritually at the moment and will continue to do so. The movement, well, just look at these waves where the ground is, and the fact that we've got this koi carp here as well indicates that up is down and down is up for Pete. He's a man of contradictions, and I'm going to come back to this. This is a central motif in his doodle here. But the ground, you could see this as rolling hills, but there is a definite surging that takes place. And interestingly enough, the waters, if we can see them as such for the time being, around here on the left-hand side of the canvas, which are indicative of the past, are swirling, but they are calm in comparison to this titanic tidal wave that's leaping its way into the future. And that's also the direction in which the koi carp is facing. This is someone who is ambitious, who has great plans for the future, but also feels as if he's almost on a current, almost being drawn along on the journey, which might seem at times to be out of control. Not only will he feel out of control of his own energy and power, but will feel as if there is almost a sense of destiny that's driving his direction at the moment. And then, but balanced with that, we have these very detailed fingerprints that represent the foliage of the tree. So despite this movement and energy that we have here, there's a great deal of composition, self-discipline, focus, the ability to direct an analytical mind. And that's reinforced by the detail in the scales on the koi carp, the stars that are spangled throughout the image here, and the shading on the tree and the trunk itself. So Pete's someone with a great deal of energy, creative reserves, but is also able to marshal and direct those into action and see a project through to completion. But I would say that this attention to detail borders on the obsessive. So there'll be times where Pete finds it hard to switch off, and I would imagine if he doesn't already do so, he would benefit from some sort of meditation or disciplines that allow him to switch off his mind and reconnect to his centre, because all of this outgoing vibrancy has a price if you aren't careful. So let's look at some of the details of the tree itself. I've talked about the winged angel. It's a winter tree in that, although we have foliage, we can see clearly the pattern of the trunk here and the branches emerging from it. Winter tree people are people who value honesty, directness, clarity. They don't like people wearing masks or people being two-faced. Ironically, though, Pete has some of those qualities himself. I'm not saying he's two-faced, but he has masks that he wears with different people, and very few people know who he really is, because he's such a capable performer, and he is a student of humanity. He studies people, and in doing so he's come to understand himself, and realizing that his persona, his identity, is plastic, it's mercurial, and can shift and change to suit the occasion. The fingerprints also show that he values originality and creative expression, that he lives for this, in fact, and it's colourful, notice, not just one, but three colours that combine. The resolution of these three colours, and notice they're all warm, towards the warm end of the spectrum, the reds here, the purples, and the orangey yellows, they culminate in a much more gentle pink as we see these cherry blossoms falling from the tree. So it's almost out of this mad, chaotic, energetic explosion of thought emerge well-formed and much more gentle creative projects. Another contradiction we find in the image is that we have stars representing the fact that this image is a night scene, and yet it's full of light and energy. So Pete's someone who values the mysterious, he revels in the unknown, but at the same time he likes to bring light and humour to the world around him. The branches on the tree, on the whole, reach upwards. There are one or two downturned branches, and I suspect that this indicates that Pete has a very, very strong emotional centre, and he experiences extreme moods. So great highs, but also quite dark lows, where he has to work quite hard to lift himself out of the darkness. You'll notice that there are several knots as well on the tree. Those who are familiar with my book, Doodle Me a Tree, will remember that knots in my tree reading system indicate trauma or challenges from the past that have been healed. And people who exhibit knots on their tree are usually empathetic, sensitive, gentle and warm-hearted people, because they know of the pain of the world and they want to relieve others of that pain and discomfort. In a phone call to Pete about a month ago now, I referred to him as a wounded healer because I perceive that same shamanic quality to Pete's persona that you sometimes see in healers in indigenous cultures. He's an entertainer, but he also seeks to heal and sees entertainment as a vehicle for healing of others and of himself in doing this. Now, the koi carp is an interesting feature because the carp is also associated with the dragon, and there's this fiery, dynamic energy to Pete as well. There's this potential for gentleness and feminine quality, but have no doubt that if crossed, he's a fearsome character. The neck of the tree here, we see multiple branches emerging, which you'd expect from a winter tree, but also some darkness and some shading here, suggesting that Pete has multiple projects on the go at the same time, lots of different potential directions in which his life could go, and he's really not sure at the moment. He's in a period of flux and change right now. If we direct our attention down here to the base of the tree, the roots and the bottom of the tree widens, meaning that family and a sense of identity with a particular location is important. Now, this is at odds a little bit with what I know about Pete's background. I don't know all the details, but I know that he has had a challenging upbringing. But this would suggest, actually, that there is a great deal of grounding and an identification with a strong sense of belonging. So I can only assume that this might represent a close-knit group of friends who, alongside the extended family who helped raise Pete, were able to be a bedrock for him and give him some stability in a world that seemed otherwise entirely in flux. Pete mentioned to me that a number of his creative projects have been encoded within the doodle. So, for example, those who are familiar with his performance of an effect called Isabella's Star, where we have the stars, Big of Fish, one of Pete's better-known books, where we have a big fish, and so on. But I think that if you look at the reason why those effects and books are titled as they are, they're not in themselves random. So those who know Isabella's Star, it's about Pete's relationship with his grandfather and his grandmother and how he came to be. So it's an origin story. Bigger Fish, one of Pete's most influential films that's helped shape him and his approach to his performance, is Big Fish, the movie. So this isn't a case of encoding simply for the sake of advertising his skills and products. It's more about the fact that Pete recognises that who he is today and how he expresses himself in the world is the sum total of the experiences that he has had and that have shaped him. And so he's someone who is very reflective, very thoughtful, and places a great deal of stock in the ability to be able to shift and change in the world, that he is a human becoming and not just a human being. If we look briefly at the signature here, in fact, I'll zoom in on that a little bit for you there. The signature here is got an upward energy. It's directed with an upward slant. It's clear that you can read P. Turner. Interestingly, the P is just the initial. He's not signed Pete Turner. So there is a degree to which Pete keeps people at a distance, and there's a surprising degree of formality and cautiousness in his professional life, not in his personal life. Because remember, the signature here is reflecting his social and professional identity. It suggests to me that he can be a little bit coy and a little bit standoffish when he's first getting to meet people. But the kiss underneath it shows, again, this desire to be able to please others, to make changes in the world that have a positive impact. The upward slant, again, matches the direction of the trees and the branches. Very driven, very ambitious, and just needs to marshal those energies to make sure that he doesn't burn himself out. I'm going to just zoom back to the original size again now. Here we go. So there's a lot more I could say about this. When I'm doing tree doodles, I combine the science of tree reading, where I'm drawing upon the model of numerous trees that I've seen in the past, but I'm also working on an intuitive level. And so sometimes I get impressions or ideas that I can't really explain where they come from, but I've learned to trust them over time. And a couple of things that popped up for me here is that despite the fact that Pete's in a healthy and balanced relationship, I do get a sense that there is some issue around women that Pete's working through. And this is a little bit personal, and I did suggest at first that I was not going to put this onto the recording, but Pete, in typical fashion, has said that he wants this to be unvarnished and that I should have free rein to say whatever I notice. So I do think that there's some tension around women here, that there's some anger associated with women, as well as a great love and passion. But there's some sense in which he's got some work to do on his relationship with females in general. It might be that he feels wounded and is a little guarded, or it might be that because he has such a finely tuned emotional life himself, he actually identifies more closely with women than men sometimes, but that means that he's having to renegotiate his own relationship to his own femininity. So it's not necessarily his relationship with women, it's a relationship to the feminine principle. So we're getting into some quite heavy stuff here. The other thing I picked up was I felt strong reflux and problems around the digestive area in doing this interpretation. So it could be that Pete has acid reflux or takes medication that help him control this, and I suspect that that's probably his weak area. So when he gets stressed, it probably comes out. For me, it's asthma, so it's my lungs. For Pete, I suspect it's his digestive tract, and he just needs to be a little bit careful around that. But it's an early warning system. It's like a canary in the mine for him. If he starts finding that this reflux is happening, it's a reminder that he needs to slow down a bit. So it's a beautiful tree, it's a beautiful doodle, and something that I am going to have framed and put in my study because it is such a striking piece of work, not typical of the tree doodles that I receive. But I wanted to give this interpretation because it shows you the versatility of tree reading. You can do something from a 15-second doodle to actually quite a complex piece of artwork, and the system still is applicable. So those are my thoughts. I would like to say thank you to everybody who's already done an interpretation of Pete's tree, either here on the blog or on the Magic Cafe thread where I posted this image. There are some excellent interpretations out there, and I've tried not to repeat too much of that material because I wanted to offer some additional things that I might have seen. But there's some fantastic readings, so thank you for those who participated. Thanks for Pete for sharing this, and thank you for listening.